Hi, this is Miss Vanoy. I'm here today to talk to you about counterclaims and rebuttals. This is a skill that a lot of middle schoolers find out that they're lacking. It's kind of a brand new skill for middle schoolers in general, but it's what keeps a lot of us at a proficient, or excuse me, below a proficient or distinguished level because we're not doing counterclaims and rebuttals. And today I'm going to talk to you about exactly what counterclaims and rebuttals even are. Now, all right, so I use this picture of like a balancing, like a law and order thing, because I wanted you to realize that you can't just talk about your side only and make it all heavy on one side. You've also got to be able to address the other side, but when you address that other side, you've got to be able to say, okay, I see what you're thinking. I'll address your needs as my audience, but this is why you're weak or why you're wrong. So we're going to talk about the strategies to be able to do that. There's an old saying called, have you ever heard of that elephant in the room? You can't ignore the elephant. The counterclaim is like trying, if you do not write a counterclaim, it's like you are ignoring the elephant. It kind of makes you seem even dumber because anybody that is writing an argumentative piece, they're writing it to an audience that probably doesn't agree with them, because why would they be arguing something if their audience automatically agreed? There'd be no point in even writing. So you want to think about what is the opposite viewpoint going to be thinking. And if you don't address that, that makes you seem like you've never thought of that. You haven't thought through all the different options. You haven't looked at both sides. You've not researched everything. It makes your argument stronger when you can acknowledge what the other person is thinking and be able to have a rebuttal for that. It's also kind of like if you've ever been in an argument with somebody and all you can think about while the other person is talking is, but I'm right, this, and you've got all your thoughts together and you can't even listen to the other person because you're thinking about how you think you're right in a certain way. If the other person would immediately address, okay, I know you're thinking this, I know that this is what you believe, but this is why you're wrong, or this is why your argument is weak, then that kind of puts you on a leveler playing field and lets them be able to listen and hear what you're trying to argue with more. Now, a disclaimer, as always, I guess with all my videos, I know that writing is an art. I know when I was younger, I hated feeling like teachers were putting me in a box on how to write exactly, and I didn't like that paint by numbers type of writing. But I realize the older I get and the more I teach that how important it is that we have those skills to fall back on, not just for people who maybe are just not naturally, it doesn't come to them as natural, writing doesn't. I'm talking about even some of us who are very gifted writers. We are going to encounter one day writing pieces that we're not motivated to write for, maybe it's work or college or high school or whatever, or we're not interested in, and we're going to have a harder time writing that if all we've ever done is just gone by our gut instinct on what sounds good. You've got to have these skills in your toolbox to be able to fall back on, so that if you ever do struggle trying to write something, that you know, okay, well, I've got to do this, this, and this. You've got these basic skills, that skeletal framework to fall back on. So yes, writing is an art, and I realize that. But for all intents and purposes on this explanation, I'm going to give you the one way to do it, the best way, the easiest way. Let's say it that way. And I want you to follow this procedure. It's not until you've got these sort of things mastered that you can bend and kind of break the rules some. Counterclaim, as a reminder, is addressing the other side's point of view. A rebuttal is addressing that other side's point of view, but also explaining why your argument is better and why your argument is correct and they're incorrect. Now, the counterclaim paragraph is organized in three ways. There is first, you introduce the claim. Then you address the claim with your rebuttal, and then you have a conclusion. And if you're doing the math right, you'll see that that means that paragraph that you're writing, because we're going to put this as a separate paragraph right before the conclusion, that paragraph is only going to be maybe 3 sentences at the minimum. Does that mean you could write a little bit more? You may have more details for the counterclaim. You may even want to pull some direct evidence in from the research that you've done, but then also argue against that direct evidence and say, this is why I feel like this is not as strong or as weaker than my argument. But this is the skeletal framework. Introduce, address with rebuttal, and conclude. Now, if you're one of these math-minded people, I try to put it together like an equation. X is your argument or claim, and Y is the opposite side, which is your argument. This is your rebuttal. So skeptics of X claim Y. However, these arguments are weak because of X. You can kind of fill in the blank there if that way helps you the best. 2 strategies to help you when you write your rebuttal is to think, number 1, Is there an obvious flaw to the counterclaim? Is there something that's like, no, duh, that's got to be wrong? What's the flaw to it? Why do you believe so strongly in your argument? And why is this argument wrong? Now, another way to do it, and sometimes this is very appealing to readers, is to say, hey, the counterclaim is this. You've got a point. You're right in a lot of ways, but this is why my argument is stronger than your argument. This is why there is weakness to it. You may be right in some ways, but it's still not as good as my argument. So those two things you can think about when you're thinking of your rebuttal. Now, you want to point out obvious flaws. For instance, in this example, it says many people argue that bullying is a natural part of humanity. However, they fail to understand that bullying is a cycle that has been perpetuated for centuries and that all cycles can be broken. So first, I addressed the claim. I said, okay, other people think this, but this is why you're wrong. I also could talk about how it's weak. In this other example, it talks about how e-cigarettes are better than having to use like real cigarettes. And the person said, oh, you know what? You're right. They are better than real cigarettes. That doesn't mean that they're not harmful and that we shouldn't stay away from them. So they had that rebuttal of we should still stay away from them because. All right, now you'll notice the words I didn't have highlighted with a color, and I want to really focus on that right now because those were transitional words, text frames. And if you ever get struggled writing, because sometimes the hardest thing to do is just get pencil to paper, think about these kind of text frames. This is what you want to put in your writer's toolbox. This is something you want to have stored away in your brain that you can remember. To introduce a counterclaim, I could say something like, on the other hand, some people, or admittedly, some people. If I want to address the original counterclaim, however, and then do my rebuttal, nevertheless, my rebuttal, on the other hand, my rebuttal, and then I can conclude it with words like thus, therefore, as a result, and I can reinforce what my original thesis argument is. Now, a lot of people ask, where do I put my counterclaim and rebuttal? Technically, like I talked about earlier with an R, you could have it in your supporting details, but a lot of times when you put it with your supporting details, it almost can make your writing seem too informational because you gave too much of an equal side to the argument. My advice, and this is what we want you to do as writing teachers at Garrett Middle, is we want you to put it in a paragraph right before your conclusion. And it's going to be a minimum of those 3 sentences where you introduce the counterclaim, you rebut it, or you have your rebuttal, and then you conclude it with the conclusion sentence. This is very important, right before the last paragraph. Now, here's an analysis of acknowledging how a counterclaim can be written. This will be the paragraph right before the conclusion. They introduce it with the phrase, on the other hand. Some people say that rock music contains lyrics that are rebellious. So they go on to talk about the rebellious lyrics and how some people don't like rock music, which goes against what their claim is, that rock music's good for you. And they even find some quotes within the research they did. But they go on to say with the rebuttal where they acknowledge that, they say, however, and rock music itself is not enough for a teenager to rebel. Yeah, there are maybe some lyrics like in punk rock, but that doesn't mean that all teenagers are going to rebel because they listen to punk rock music or rock music. And then you have that conclusion, the therefore, and then you reinforce that your original claim, to go back to that thesis. So there's no doubt in the reader's mind what you are trying to argue for. I hope this cleared up some things for you. Again, counterclaims and rebuttals are something brand new to middle school students. Technically, 6th graders still are with persuasive writing, but I think that you all should be challenged to understand what a counterclaim is and what a rebuttal is. Again, hope to follow my advice of this is where we want you to write it and how we want you to write it, so that you will start off with the strongest strategies possible to write the most wonderful argumentative piece. Thank you.